We can say that access to the land is common to all humanity. We've already mentioned that. It's because people are equal due to the fact that we are of the same nature and we all have reason and will. We also have 46 chromosomes and all the rest of it. And so we have this radical, fundamental equality. We can't take natural things away from people, and likewise we can't take the natural common right to land. Land is common to humanity. This becomes a complexity further on down the track. There are natural rights to property, especially things like sufficient land in order to live. The idea of having a space where I can lay down at night, and if I lay down there, nobody else can. And so I need to have that personal property in land. And this notion of personal property is something which humans have been arguing over in various ways pretty much through all of human history. But especially in the last 500 or 600 years, it's become an issue because it's only in that time where private property as we know it at present has emerged. This can be a bit of a surprise to many people because we tend to think that private property is as old and as natural as humanity, but in fact it's not. We have a common right to share the land. We have only a conventional right to have a particular part of it, but we can justify that on the basis of our physical needs to live, because remember, life is a natural property of what it is to be human. Hugo Grotius was an 18th century thinker who noticed that and said, but while we have a naturally common right to the land in general, we have a right to personal land, personal allocation, personal property, sufficient to support life. So where we go, we need to have one way or another a way of securing that land we need to live. Doesn't necessarily mean we can secure the land, a huge amount of land. It simply means that that amount of land that we need in order for life itself to support life can be private. And so while Hugo Grotius is considered to be one of the early theorists who gave us a explanation, a proof, a justification for private property, it's only limited by the dimensions of human need. Likewise, John Locke looked at the same question and said, well, if I invest labour into land, then the land must be mine, because if it's taken away from me, then the labour that I've put into it is also being taken away. So if I go out and plant a crop and then someone comes along and says, no, you can't go there, you can't harvest the crop and eat it or benefit from it, he has done me an injustice. That's a natural injustice because it's my life, part of my life, in the form of my labour, which is actually welded into the land when I plant those seeds or clear the land or put a fence around it or any other places where human labour is applied to natural resources. Perhaps things like selective breeding or weeding a garden or whatever. They're all places where labour is being put into the land, connected to it, and John Locke would say that that is justification for my private property. John Locke's argument, though, was not quite as simple as that, and certainly not as limited. He would say that once I did that, the land became mine forever. And in fact, after I had obtained it as private property as a result of my labour, then I would be able to have that property as mine for my profit against all other people forever. And that's where the theory of John Locke comes apart somewhat. By contrast, Islamic law, Sharia law, takes almost exactly the same argument. The labour that is put into land gives people a right to that land, an exclusive right to that land, but it limits it to the value of the labour itself. And so if I plant a field, My labour planted in the field means that I have a right to that land as private property. But once I extract all of that labour out, say by harvesting the crop, then I no longer have that private property right. It means that in Islamic law, it's very hard to own land if you're not using it, if it isn't actively reflecting some human labour. I might own a block of land. I might build a property, build a house, and that house is the product of my labour. And so as long as the house stands, then I have a special call on it. But once the house is gone, my interest in the land is gone. That might take 40 or 50 years, or maybe 100 years, or what have you, so that can be fairly permanent. But certainly my right as a farmer to farm the land once, plant one crop, and then go off and simply own it forever and perhaps put tenants in it where I charge them a rent is very uncomfortable in Islamic law. And Islamic law also has provisions for some things never to be privatised, and these include waterways, forests and mines. And the exclusion of mines from private property possibility does give rise to some very interesting situations in Islamic countries. Topic for another day, but it is important in the property law in Islamic countries. Overall, we can see that natural property rights are limited by human needs to support life. And then we have conventional rights to land. And a convention is simply an arbitrary set of rules. It's not naturally true or false or valid or invalid. It is simply what a particular bunch of human beings decide to adopt. In the same way that we might have a round ball and we might choose to play soccer rather than basketball. Does it matter which one we play? No, not really. It's simply a convention, and as long as the society, the football club, is happy to adopt that, then that's what's being adopted, and it can change over time. The title systems that we study, especially the old system and Torrens titles, they're arbitrary ultimately. They're useful because they give us social benefits, but they are dependent on the social order. And we see many occasions in history when title systems have changed. And we see that, there are so many examples it's hard to really start. But basically when one country is taken over by another, or when a country has some form of social change, for instance, the abolition of feudalism, which you can see, say, in the last 100 years in Taiwan, also in Japan, a bit further back, the development of our title system, the Anglo title system, is only about 500 years old or so. And so these things change, the conventions change, as the decisions of society change. The conventional rights to property are not actually ownership in the strict sense. I never own my, real estate block of land that has my house on it in the same way that I own my body, my hands or my feet. It's merely a bundle of rights to use it in a particular way. And that set of rights is what constitute what we normally talk about, and certainly what we're going to be spending most of our time in this unit talking about, as our property rights. The concept behind all of these conventions, when we have an orderly society, is to respect some aspect of natural human rights, and they are principally life and labour. And so if we have a good title system, and we could maybe use the Torrens title system as a reference, we can say that's a useful way of respecting human natural rights to allocations of the Earth's surface. But there can be better and worse ones. There can be tyrannical conventions, and overall one of the jobs of society is to look at its title systems in order to give the best respect to the natural human rights. And we see that in the way that property rights change or have changed. In the last century, for instance, there have been immense changes to property rights, the separation of water property, the development of planning controls managed by local governments and the states, have all been either adding or subtracting to the property rights that we enjoy.